It's a great way to start. We really do collect things that mean a lot to us. Things that are expensive, and some things that are just nostalgic in nature, may have been passed down through centuries, and things that we hold on to. So we're going to explore that a little bit this morning, if you'll pray with me real quick. God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts and minds be acceptable in your sight. O God, who is our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So there was a kindergarten teacher who passed out some paper and all of the crayons and markers, probably not markers, and asked all of the little students to draw a picture of their favorite objects and just have at it. Anything in the world that you really, really like and love. So after a little while, she went around, she saw pictures of beautiful trees and homes and family members and boats and all sorts of things. Until she got to little Johnny's desk. She didn't really quite recognize what little Johnny was drawing and said, "What are you drawing? What is this?" And he said, "Well, it's a picture of God. Can't you tell?" And she said, "Well, how can you draw a picture of God? No one knows what God looks like." He stopped for a minute and looked at her and said, "Well, they will when I get done." I think that's probably the same idea that the Israelites were thinking as they were going through this time of absence from Moses. They wanted an image. They wanted something that linked them to God. See, they had Moses, and Moses decided he'd just trek up the mountain and stay there for a good long while. Longer than they felt comfortable with. And so in that time of upheaval and not knowing what's next, they went to Aaron, who was kind of the substitute teacher, and needed something. They asked Aaron, "Please help us. You're our leader at the moment. Build us an image. Give us something that will connect us back to our faith and to our journey, to the things that we remember God doing in the past." And so that's what happened. And much to God's dismay, I think. But it was out of a place of insecurity. You notice I just walked over to my security place. This sermon has got me on edge. But the fact that I'm insecure at times, and I bet if you're honest with yourself, you are too. It's how you react to that insecurity that will make all the difference to your faith. I think we have a lot to learn. Let's look at the image first. The Israelites chose the image of a cow, of a bull, calf in this instance. And if you remember from a few weeks ago when Sarah spoke about the cow being a sacred animal, an animal that linked those people, at least in thought, to God or to gods, that's what they asked for. It was the strongest symbol that came to their mind. If you visit any Mormon temple today, and I'm sure some of you have, you'll notice in the baptistry, which is a huge room, usually bigger than this room, a large pool or a baptistry pool, and it's placed upon the backs of 12 cows, bulls, each representing one of the 12 tribes of Israel. So the calf as a symbol of a pedestal, a symbol of holding up something to God, a place for sacrifice, is still used even today, along with many other things. It was meant to be a replacement for their leader Moses. I think that's where they went wrong, is that although Moses wasn't some statue, he was a leader that kept them connected to God. God spoke directly to Moses, and Moses then explored all the things and the journeys that they were going on as a people. I think they also found comfortability in the fact that this calf also was a familiar image to their captivity in Egypt. It resembled an Egyptian-like god. And although captivity was not fun for the Israelites, it was a place of security since they knew that place. Not comfortable, but it wasn't unknown to them. So what is an image supposed to do for us? What is this golden calf supposed to do for us? What is it supposed to represent? These people forged a great dependence upon Moses. And I think even though God was dismayed with it, it still was a positive aspect that they were seeking God's guidance. And they were looking for something tangible. And God says to Moses, you're going to have to go down again and take care of this mess. And really deal with these people. They're stiff-necked. They're stubborn, as Bill said. They want to do things the old way. They're narrowly focused. They're inflexible. And they're closed-minded. Almost like putting together a 1,000-piece puzzle. Any fans of puzzles in here? Yeah, not me. My COD kicks in, or CDO. It's in alphabetical order instead of OCD. And it drives me insane. So we have a story with just a few puzzle pieces. And God, almost on a sigh, says, I have to do this again. These are such stiff-necked people. I've led them through the Exodus, through deliverance. In several ways, these people have seen my hand in action, where the rest of the world and the rest of humanity had not seen. Why are they still stubborn? Why do they still hold on to the old ways of sacrifice? Why do they still need images to link themselves to me? And God grows more dismayed. And so Moses fights a fight, a dialogue with God up on the mountain. I know a lot of people would probably focus on Aaron, not. This is still about the dialogue between God and Moses. And he fights the fight on behalf of the people, much like your leaders in this church do. It's a church, and although we sometimes go this way and sometimes go that way on our own leanings, we have leadership that still stands firm and takes responsibility. And so Moses says, don't destroy your people. You promised servants like Abraham and Isaac and all of Israel that you wouldn't do that. And so patience prevails again. I'm reminded of a story of when Charles William Eliot was president of Harvard University. And he was asked to dedicate a new hall of philosophy. And so he calls the faculty together, and this is right before summer break, right before vacation. And he asked them for ideas of an inscription to go over the doorway of that philosophy hall. And after much debate, they agreed upon the old Greek maxim, man is the measure of all things. And with that, they voted and they left for the summer. When they returned in the fall for the next school year, the faculty walked in and noticed that the inscription over the door had changed from what they had voted on to something that Mr. Eliot deemed a little more appropriate. And he pulled it right from Psalm 8. What is man that you are mindful of him? You see, God commands Moses, leave me alone. I need to think about all of this. I need to put the pieces together. And I wonder, why would Moses need to leave God alone? God looks weak and impulsive, and Moses, in comparison, looks magnificent. This once unconfident man evidences wisdom by pointing out how the Egyptians, for one, would mock God if God destroyed the Israelites. And then Israel's impassioned leader also somehow convinced God to change God's mind. Reminds God that he made this promise. Remember, you're always mindful of your people. We may never fully understand why and the passion behind the reason for the Israelites to go to Aaron and choose a calf. But it does set a precedence throughout humankind and humanity to pull together things that symbolize God, that help us spiritually hold on to something tangible. Things like bibliology and theology and seminaries and places of worship and altars and pulpits that bring us security. They keep us calm and they keep us focused in our spiritual life, in our spiritual journey. It's something seen that represents the unseen. The invisible and the unknown is hard for each of us to touch because we can't. And this whole thing about God and this creator that is out there someplace, we don't have a face, we don't have a hand that we can actually physically grab like one another. And so the Israelites look at each other. And through that process, they build dependencies. Some are healthy dependencies on their leader and on each other, and some are not. We do that today. Some depend on their parents. Some depend on the company they work for. Some depend on traditions. And unfortunately and sadly, some even turn to dependencies on drugs and alcohol and other things that can be harmful to us. So here's the message that maybe it's time for the Israelites to pull away from those dependencies and stand up on their own 2 feet. To build images that actually are not brought forth out of panicking. This morning I panicked. This sermon was a tough one to deal with. I should have just chose the gospel, something I was a little more familiar with, something that kept me comfortable and away from this security. But I don't think that would have done me or you any good. Last Sunday we celebrated 2 sacraments in the Church of the United Church of Christ that we really look at, and that is communion and baptism. Communion and baptism will continue to be celebrated in our churches. Sacraments are nothing more than visual and visible expressions of our inner faith. A way for us to touch the untouchable, and a way for us to connect to God. It expresses an inner spiritual working outwardly, so that we can all share in that together. The motives of the Israelites was not a bad thing. The motive of each of us to want to hold something, to touch something, to see an altar, to celebrate and worship together. These are all positive things. They keep us connected to God. It's when we become stubborn and set in our ways that we stop changing and growing and moving forward. And that, I think, is what angered God and dismayed God at this time. That the Israelites were so close-minded. In 1829, Martin Van Buren, the governor of New York, was not happy with the president, and so he wrote this little note to the president. He said, "The canal system of this country is being threatened by the spread of a new form of transportation known as railroads. The federal government must preserve our canals for these few reasons. One, if canal boats are supplanted by railroads, serious unemployment will result. Captains, cooks, drivers, repairmen, and lock tenders will be left without any means of livelihood. Canal boats are essential for our defense. In the event of trouble with England, the Erie Canal could be the only means by which we could move supplies. Surely the Almighty never intended for people to travel through our countryside at the breakneck speed of 15 miles an hour. Sometimes systems, structures, sacred icons, practices, Taj Mahals, rituals, and liturgy can become a barrier for change. In other words, we too have our golden calves. They consume our resources, and they take up all of our loyalty. And in return, give us back a false sense of security. Today, I encourage you to examine your stiff neck. How sore are you with change? And then when you realize that, secretly,